One of the greatest professions in any country, and certainly the UK used to lead way ahead across the world, to be honest with you, is the education system. Culturally, for most people, for most countries, teachers were revered. Unfortunately, over the last few decades, this has not really manifested into the way teachers are being treated and handled. And when I was a little kid, many centuries ago, we used to go to school and the teachers did one thing: teach. Now, they don't just teach. There are teachers, administrators, counselors, therapists, and I have to say, underpaid babysitters. There's many titles we could put to them. So on today's episode of the School's Motivational Speaker Podcast, it's not just me who goes into schools and speaks. We actually have a very special guest who works uniquely, not just with teachers, but uniquely in this case, this purpose of this episode, uniquely with teachers to help to deal with the anxiety and stress. Helen dos Santos, welcome to the School's Motivational Speaker Podcast. Great to have you.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me along. And I love the way you introduced that with all the, I think you missed off one task: cleaner. You'd be surprised how much teaching staff end up cleaning up.
They clean up not just literally the mess, but they clean up the mess. I have to say, parents, some of which parents make, and it's not a matter of fault or anything like that. It's a matter of, right, how can we make things better? From the workload, obviously, that teachers get, based on some of the things that I've already said, what are the biggest reasons or causes of stress for teachers?
Wow. The list is probably quite endless, and I might not cover everything. Just going back to some of the things you've said, it's not 100% teaching anymore. I think some of the largest challenges they face is the pressure of observations and OFSTED. Teaching has almost become a tick box exercise as opposed to what's the best for the pupils. So that's a big key driver. There's the handling of pupil behavior as well. And whilst certain behaviors might be acceptable in the home, educational settings are perhaps trying to not tolerate it and instill better, improved behavior, but that can take up quite a lot of time. And then some of the conversations with parents as well can be extremely challenging.
When teachers are stressed, how does that affect student engagement or the environment, I call it, the vibe of the room? How does that directly impact young people?
That's going to have a massive impact. What you'll probably find in a lot of cases is that pupils will pick up quite subliminally that there's something going on. That in turn causes, and it may be the thing that causes some of the behavioral issues, but they will certainly pick up on it. I think teachers, as they become more stressed, they're possibly less tolerant of certain things that are going on in the classroom. So they become quite snappy. And that then, you've got children then going home talking to the parents about something the teacher did or snapped at them about. And then before you know it, you've got parents complaining about the behavior of the teacher. So it's like this vicious circle that's going round for them to have to deal with.
One of the big issues, of course, you mentioned is OFSTED. We know OFSTED is affecting so many lives, teachers' lives, of course, to the point that one of the head teacher actually took their own life. It's always a complicated topic, and the topic of empathy maybe isn't talked about enough. How is OFSTED affecting not just the head teachers, because they're going to be under pressure the most, but how is it affecting every other teacher, if at all?
I think it does have a knock-on effect, because at the back of everybody's mind, it's always going to be about meeting those standards that Ofsted come in and inspect you on. So I think that it will filter down to from the heads to the deputies, the heads of subjects, and then down to the teaching staff. So it will have that knock-on effect. I suppose the other thing to bear in mind is how observations also play a part with that, because observations are about making sure you are delivering your classes and your teaching to the standard that Ofsted would be looking at. So even observations are causing that sort of stress and concern amongst teaching staff as well.
One of the issues that people probably don't ever think about is actually, if you got on one side of the equation teachers and schools, entire schools being hugely stressed, what do you think? And we're just speculating here. What about the Ofsted inspectors? How are they affected by the fact that they're scaring the living daylights, if they're even aware of it, of course, out of teachers, or at least putting huge amounts of anxiety and pressure? How do you think, what's going on for them?
Do you know, that's an interesting question. And not one I've actually thought about too much, but you do have to wonder. I mean, I guess they are also under pressure from the Ministry of Education to ensure, or the Department of Education to ensure that they are ensuring that schools are meeting certain standards. So I guess there's a stress and a tension that they feel they're under as well. Interestingly, and I don't know if this is something that you've become aware of, but inspectors, you mentioned the head teacher that took their life this time last year, and inspectors are now undertaking mental health awareness training. But for me, it needs more than that.
What do you think is needed then? If you can, maybe we're not going into the whole Ofsted thing too much, but it'd be good to hear what kind of training or support do Ofsted inspectors need before we dive into teachers? What do they need that might help ease the tension?
For me, there's something about some compassion and empathy. They can probably resonate with how they feel, knowing what head teachers feel. But also, and I'm sure this is not something people think about all of the time, is the language that we're using, the wording that we're using, which can have, the words have so much power. They can either empower or absolutely destroy someone's confidence. And there was a post recently on LinkedIn, and I got tagged into it, and it was about the fact that inspectors were having mental health training. And I was asked to comment, and I thought, actually, it's not just the awareness, but it's what you say to people and the how you say it as well. There's a whole psychology around communication, and I think that probably needs to be instilled with some of the inspectors as well.
You've been working, when we first met, of course, you've been working with teachers, but let's go back in terms of our teachers and parents listening to actually understand which angle you're coming from. So tell us a bit of a potted history of before you came into helping teachers. I noticed you did stuff with the military as well.
I set up on my own in 2016. My passion was to work with education, because in a previous place of employment, I supported a director of education. But yes, so in addition to the work I do in education, I do support the military as well. And that has partly been down to some of the transitional work. So when you've got people who have kind of met their set time for serving and they're leaving, but they're still of an age. The military talk about people retiring, but actually they might not be retiring. They may still be at an age where they want to work and go off and do something else. But it's that transition from being in the military, going back into civilian life. And we don't necessarily stop and think about it, but the military is so heavily institutionalized. And service leavers can't necessarily identify with how their skills in the army or any of the tri-services could transform into a place of employment and a role in civilian life. That then in turn affects their confidence, their self-belief, etc. So originally my work with them was on that transition piece. With some of the work I've done in the barracks, they've started to realize that when I do my introductory piece, I mention trauma, because one of the one-to-one work I do, is actually getting rid of PTSD. That got the interest of one of our local psychiatric consultants a few years ago, where he sort of said to me, I don't know if you're aware, but you're actually getting rid of PTSD. Although I go in and I run training and workshops with some of the service leavers, it has actually ended up that I've done some one-to-one work with any of the serving personnel who may be suffering with trauma.
Do you actually see any PTSD or trauma type symptoms amongst teachers?
Yes, you can do, very easily. Somebody once said to me, trauma is about how you perceive a situation. Yes, it might be, but actually the brain encodes trauma in a certain way. So there is a whole load of neuroscience behind the encoding. And although a situation, so somebody being bitten by a dog, your brain might encode that as trauma, whereas somebody thinking about being bitten by a dog, you think, actually, no, that's not traumatic. But if you were held up at gunpoint or knife point down a dark alleyway, yeah, that would be awful. Yes, you do see it. When I do the one-to-one work with heads or teaching staff, there are occasions when you pick it up in conversation that there is something going on, particularly, and one of the telltale signs is where there are triggers that keep reoccurring. And that starts to impact on that individual.
What kind of signs and symptoms do people demonstrate? We're focusing on teaching now, of course. So teachers, what kind of signs and symptoms do teachers demonstrate to indicate that potentially they've got trauma or unresolved trauma?
There'll be triggers. Let's say, for example, there's been a particular incident. I mean, sometimes schools end up going into lockdown for all manner of reasons, but perhaps there's been a particular incident that's really affected somebody. So if we take the locking a school down, for example, that might warrant certain alarms going off. If in a few months' time, similar alarms go off, but it might be for a completely different reason, that may well be the trigger that takes them back into that emotional state. Not necessarily realizing it's taking them back to that incident that happened, but it'll certainly sort of perhaps get all those emotions sort of aroused and start to upset them again.
There's a very high staff turnover across the board, but particularly in the education system. I know of schools which are losing 5 or 6 members of staff a week. What can you share about staff turnover? I mean, what's been going on in the schooling system that you're aware of?
Where do you start? I mean, this is not solvable by you or I, but in some cases it can be related to pay. And we know that certainly education systems outside of the UK pay significantly more. But that work-life balance is absolutely massive. We're finding teaching staff are working longer hours. I can see it just on the emails that I get, the time of, and I had one from, funny enough, the chief executive of a multi-academy trust at 20 to 10 last night. Even a CEO of a trust, needs to have their quiet time, their work-life balance, the hours they work. And clearly you can't make the hours in the day, because if you are teaching, you're scheduled to be in a classroom at certain times of the day. But more and more is being put on them in terms of expectations. And funny enough, one of the things I do in my training is talk about sometimes we just have to be brave enough to consider saying no.
It can be as simple as that, right? It's knowing when to say no.
Yeah.
So there's stress and then there's burnout. What's the difference between the two? Or how do you know which is happening?
Well, let's start with one step prior to stress, which is pressure. And I always sort of think pressure is, we need to meet this deadline, all hands to the pump, let's get on with it. And that can be quite motivating when there's something to focus on and you've got a deadline to meet. Stress creeps in when we've got constant deadlines, and there seems to be no time to pause or reflect. And actually reflection is very important. I can come on to that later. So you've got that pressure for longer periods of time. That starts to affect the way we think and the way we feel physically, as well as resulting in the way we behave and go about our daily duties. Stress for a prolonged period of times is when you get to burnout. And that's where you just hope most people are not going to end up. Pressure you can come back from, and stress you can come back from. And coping with that, there's a lot about having your own self-awareness in terms of how am I feeling right now? Or how do certain situations make me feel? And then you can try and manage that slightly differently and protect yourself from getting into that stage, that final stage where burnout could creep in.
When someone's going through burnout, and I've seen that happen to people, how can they spot it? What are the telltale signs that they might need to pause for a moment, take a step back and say, maybe I'm going through burnout and I need a bit of help here?
I think one of the biggest things will be lack of concentration. There could be that feeling of almost being detached from the job, absolute exhaustion. There is a likelihood that will impact on their sleep qualities. They'll start to see a massive difference in the way their mood is affected. They might even find themselves losing their appetite, not eating as regularly as they should. I think that the exhaustion side of things is absolutely massive. Absolutely, probably one of the biggest telltale signs. And along with that, you probably also, it would affect your concentration levels, your ability to really, really concentrate. So all those kind of cognitive functions that we need, decision making, focus, etc., would start to really be impacted with burnout.
I've seen teachers in different schools I've spoken at in different states of wellness, let's put it that way. And burnout or the stress levels, and everyone has different levels of copability, right?
Yeah.
Different coping strategies. What I found is that not only does it affect their mental well-being, it actually their physical well-being. So a lot of them end up, have to say, emotionally eating, and so they gain a lot of girth, which then increases their blood pressure, causes diabetes for some people, a lot of them actually. So there's a lot going on. Can you share with us some simple tools to help prevent? We'll talk about how you deal with burnout, but some simple tools that teachers, to be honest, should start using, and parents can do the same, and students can do the same, but let's focus on teachers. Some tools that teachers can use to help prevent burnout or prevent getting anywhere near burnout.
I talk about setting boundaries, that we need to have our own personal boundaries. And that could be something as simple as, if you've got all your work emails coming through to your phone, for example, by 7 o'clock in the evening, I will switch off my phone, or I'll choose not to look at my phone, because you'll constantly feel as though you're on duty otherwise. And the temptation is that you start then replying to those emails. So setting those boundaries, absolutely important. I think also when we're in school, making sure you do have that break for your lunch, making sure, because we've seen it all too often where people are in an absolute rush. They skip having meals. You were mentioning the physical health implications a moment ago. We skip having meals, and then suddenly we end up eating a load of rubbish, which doesn't serve us very well. Making sure that we do have those meals and staying very hydrated as well is absolutely massive.
Besides working with schools with my health practice that I have to say, some of the foods I see people eat are horrifying. What they don't realize is that sugar fix that you're going to get, a big spike, is going to be followed by a slump.
Yeah.
The processed foods, and I cannot believe how many are going to these fast food chains, which we won't name them, but you know the ones with the double arches or whatever they're called. And I really cannot fathom people are intelligent in so many respects. I'll just say it, and so dumb, I'll say it because I've got nothing to lose here. And they eat this crap, and it is destroying their health at a level that you just can't fathom. And so to me, the water, of course, is critical. Having good quality food is critical. Avoid the fast food. And you know what? If your school canteen serves rubbish, demand that they serve good food. And if they don't, make it yourself. Head teachers or leaders, of course, need to take responsibility here, because occasionally they will throw responsibilities at teachers, teaching staff, more junior staff, maybe not as senior as them, and demand that, work through lunch and you can finish off 4:30 today instead of 5 o'clock, or 4 o'clock instead of. How do you deal with those kind of boundaries when your manager, your leader, is telling you to break your boundaries?
There's probably something about being able to say, I haven't actually had my lunch yet. Is there somebody else who could help out whilst I just take 10 or 15 minutes to eat my lunch, as opposed to not have lunch at all? And that's something that actually head teachers need to look at and senior leaders need to look at, because yes, you've got to be there for the students and the pupils. You can't just sort of leave them unattended. I get that. But there has to be some sort of fairness across the board where everybody has that opportunity to have those breaks, and certainly a lunch break. I mean, you can walk around with a bottle of water in your hand most of the day, but you can't necessarily eat a sandwich when you're delivering a class to some pupils.
Saying no is actually maybe a very good policy, and it's so important that head teachers and leaders, school leadership teams, SLTs, recognize that working without a break, first of all, is illegal anyway. Just get that clear. Secondly, you're going to sacrifice this presence for effectiveness and efficiency. So in other words, you're not going to get the job done. So it's important that this is really thoroughly understood. So talk us through, or can I ask you actually, can you talk us through some key methods for supporting mental health of teachers and teaching staff?
And again, in some of my workshops, I talk about positively managing worry, because I think that's a driver for a lot of things. And a lot of the time, worry comes from lack of control and lack of uncertainty, or lack of certainty, shall I say. When we can manage those worry levels, that helps enormously. And very, very simply, the technique is think about what it is you're worrying about and ask yourself, is it true or is it untrue? Because a lot of the time we become really brilliant at future predicting. We're not worrying about what's happening now. We're worrying about what might happen later or next week or next month, next term. So right now, is that true or is it untrue? And a lot of the time we find ourselves going, it's untrue. So it's almost a case of let it go. But actually, let's say that person's concern is true. Then, all right, so what is it you can do about it? Is it solvable or unsolvable by me? Because again, if it's solvable by you, you're taking that control back. And then what action are you going to take in order to solve it? So we start to reduce those worries down just by that very, very simple process of asking yourself a few questions. The other thing I focus on quite a lot is the language that we're using. Our words are just so powerful. And what we say to ourselves, whether we're talking or whether we're thinking, it's still in words. And those words are so impactful. Now, if we're sort of saying to ourselves, I'm not a great teacher, that's going to give you that feeling of dread and hopelessness. Whereas you might not feel that you are at your best, but if you were saying, I'm improving at being a teacher, or I'm gradually improving at being a teacher, it sounds more hopeful and it's more encouraging. It gives you a feeling of, yeah, I've got this. I'm on the right track, as opposed to that sort of sense of dread and anxiety. Just those two things, managing worry and the language that we use, is absolutely massive.
You work with the head teachers quite often, and both one-to-one. I want to ask you about your trainings that you do actually in a moment. But for now, head teachers, of course, they've got a heck of a challenge looking after the systems and processes and operations and a million other things. Probably one of the loneliest jobs of the lot, because there's nobody else at the top other than yourself. So first of all, how can head teachers create a better dynamic within their team? Is there a particular process or systems? Is there anything they can do to create better dynamics within their teaching teams?
Well, that's, yes, absolutely. And one of the things that I talk about with heads is actually developing a coaching style in terms of their managing style, because what you're doing there is not taking all the responsibility on. And when you start to explore how powerful coaching style questions can be, those very open questions, you start to unlock the potential in other people. And you could be unraveling some really gorgeous golden nuggets of potential, untapped potential in other people that you weren't aware was there. So instead of feeling as though you're taking all the responsibility on yourself, you might start to unlock great skills that other people have that you haven't even tapped into yet. And they could share some of that load with you then. And they might be itching to, but just haven't even vocalized it yet.
It's quite interesting because actually you're also describing what it means to educe. That means bring out of people the best of their innate wisdom and their abilities, which is actually the root word for education, is to educe. So it's actually education, the coaching style we're referring to. Now, I know that you deal with a whole bunch of skills that you've got. Talk to us about the profiling system called the DISC system. Do you use that in schools, and in what way?
Oh, yes, I do. So the journey originally started with working with some heads. Actually, no, it wasn't. It was with some middle leaders, I tell a lie. And the CEO said to me, we're looking to develop them. We want to enhance their leadership styles. And when I asked about their level of self-awareness, she sort of said it varies. So I explained how DISC profiling works and what we would cover in the training. That was about sort of becoming more aware of your own behavior styles in the workplace, how those impact on other people, and how other people might perceive you as a result of those behaviors. But then you start to have or learn the task of being able to read other people. So how would you fit them into the DISC profiling? What that gives you is the ability then to be able to adjust and flex your style around them. And we do this all the time. It's just, are we doing it in a meaningful way? I mean, most of us kind of get by and hope that we're doing it okay. But DISC kind of gives you your own encoder to do it more deliberately and for that particular style. Coupled with DISC training now, I have combined one of my workshops called The Impact of Words, Mind Your Language. Because again, we cannot get through a working day without talking to someone. So again, it's combining how we speak, etc., with the DISC becomes really, really powerful. Along with that, I've got a half day and a full day on how to develop a coaching leadership style. Because again, as we were just saying, that can bring out the best in people, that untapped, unlocked potential that we didn't even know existed. So combining the three, now you don't have to have all three, you could do 1, 2, or 3 of those trainings, but combining the three really starts to empower individuals. And when I did it for these senior leaders, the CEO came back to me and sort of said, well, the heads have had a look at this and they're quite envious now, so we're going to have to repeat this for the heads as well. It went down a storm, really did. The feedback I've had since then is how they're putting DISC into place, how they're now managing to spot which style their staff might be and flexing their style with those conversations, but also using the coaching style as well, enhances and really enriches those discussions all the more now.
In my books, that's absolutely brilliant because it's no longer a dictatorial way of leading a team, a dynamic team. You mentioned training, of course, and the difference between training and coaching. Well, I'll ask you actually, because I'm here to ask you the questions. What is the difference in training and coaching, meaning you delivering training and you delivering coaching?
So the training is obviously to a group of people, and that can be small groups, large groups. The coaching is more on a one-to-one basis. I have done small group coaching, probably about 5 or 6 people, where they're all experiencing perhaps the same issues in the workplace, and that's worked. But by and largely, the coaching is on a one-to-one basis. And that's dealing with a specific issue relating to that person and helping them through that.
So it sounds like to me you're going to be you are very busy during inset days. And what I would urge, of course, is heads. And I'm sure head teachers already have personal coaching or are aware of it, but actually something like this is phenomenal. Otherwise you wouldn't be on this podcast. Amongst the teaching professions, is there any particular unique stressors that are a common theme for all of them amongst teachers or even amongst subject matters at all?
I think one of the unique stressor is probably sometimes the behavior presented by the students, but also I think the conversations with parents are becoming more challenging and more difficult. And that is a massive, massive stressor for them. And again, having those coaching style conversations can take some of that heat out of the conversations with the parents. So it's not just coaching your staff, but actually how you have those conversations with parents as well.
Is there anything that parents can do to help make life easier for teachers, for the teaching staff? Because of course, ultimately it's about helping raising amazing students. So the parents have got a vested interest in it. So what can parents do to improve the lives of teachers so they can do their jobs better?
I think if the conversations were more focused around what we could do, meaning working as a team, so the teacher as well as the parents. I think there's a lot of finger pointing that goes on. And I suspect the word you gets used an awful lot. You are not doing, or you should be doing. Whereas if the conversation was more about the collective, and that wraparound approach to the child. Yes, you're the parent, we're the teacher, but we need it's being more collaborative and I suppose having a united front when it comes to that pupil. I've had conversations with head teachers where they're having conversations with the students and the students sort of saying, no, but that's okay because my mum and dad say I can do it this way. So this conflict. And I think if schools and parents could work more together, more collaboratively, then it's going to take away some of that stress again.
If a teacher, head teacher, a senior leadership team wanted to get hold of you to bring you into their schools, what's the best way to get hold of you?
They can contact me via Facebook or LinkedIn or through my website, which is horizonscoaching.co.uk, or just pick up the phone.
Your details will be in the show notes, so please do get in touch with Helen. Helen, is there any question that I could have asked that I perhaps missed out, or maybe you would ask if you were in my position talking to you?
Oh, wow. No, so I think we've covered quite a lot. I suppose the thing to mention, if anybody does or is sort of thinking, do I do some one-to-one work with Helen? Maybe just to mention, I do offer a free discovery call. So there's no cost involved. And that's just a bit of an informal get to know you, explore what's going on for that person and whether they feel I can help and they're comfortable working with me.
Burnout can be prevented, and it must be prevented because the repercussions of burnouts are absolutely horrible. People are leaving their careers, and reality is if you're carrying that energy, the way you handle stress, your coping mechanisms, well, you're going to still have those same coping mechanisms post burnout. So it's better to deal with it whilst you're still in the job. So prevention is number one key.
Absolutely.
I heard the word communication, words is key, and then collaboration. Is there anything else that those three things, is there anything else that people need to walk away with to actually improve the life and happiness and balance of for teachers?
I think for me, the important message is it's down to the individual. You can do it. This isn't going to be done to you. Taking care of yourself. It's incredibly empowering when you know, actually, it's up to me. I can look after me. How empowering it is when we realize that, we have that self-responsibility and we can look after ourselves. A lot of the time when I'm working with individuals, and even when I'm running training sessions, people sort of say, I feel guilty when I'm taking time out or I'm doing something for myself. And my message is quite simple. If you want to be the best teacher, the best mum, the best partner, whatever hat you're wearing in your role in your life, don't you need to look after number one first?
What a beautiful way to end. Helen dos Santos, thank you so much for giving us so much clarity and putting the spotlight onto teachers and teaching staff. Thank you for joining the podcast. And if you enjoyed listening to the School's Motivational Speaker Podcast, I'm a School's Motivational Speaker, as are most of my guests who come along here. And make sure you like, share, subscribe, and get it into the hands of teachers and parents. Thanks for watching. Bye for now.